Hi, Roy here. Roy Reads Anything is the name of this channel, and this being both Victober and Occult Detective October, I've been reading some Victorian occult detective stories. So those are two really exciting events. Victober, I probably don't need to introduce too much. It's a huge booktube event celebrating Victorian literature. And Occult Detective October, created by MJ, focuses on that particular genre of supernatural stories. So the first week's prompts for Occult Detective October are pre-1960, so I've gone right back to 1897, when John Bell, Ghost Exposer, was appearing in Cassell's Family Magazine. And these are the kind of stories where the things and situations he faces aren't usually supernatural. Maybe they're never supernatural. So this is L.T. Meade and Robert Eustace. So L.T. Meade, incredibly productive and well known at the time author. Robert Eustace was a frequent collaborator, apparently providing kind of medical and scientific details and things like that. So it's a series of 6 stories. I'll give you a bit more info about the magazine in a bit, but the first story is called The Mystery of the Circular Chamber. So there's a little bit of an introduction where the guy says how he's it so happened that the circumstances of fate allowed me to follow my own bent in the choice of profession. From my earliest youth, the weird, the mysterious had an irresistible fascination for me. Having private means, I resolved to follow my unique inclinations. I'm now well known to all my friends as a professional exposer of ghosts, and one who can clear away the mysteries of most haunted houses. Up to the present, I've never had cause to regret my choice, but at the same time I cannot too strongly advise anyone who thinks of following my example to hesitate before engaging himself in tasks that entail time, expense, thankless labour, often ridicule, and not seldom great personal danger. To explain by the application of science phenomena attributed to spiritual agencies has been the work of my life. I have naturally gone through strange difficulties in accomplishing my mission, but with the exception of one mystery, and one only, I've always succeeded in the end. This one inexplicable horror is the dark spot in my career, but more of it and the strange despair which clings about its memory anon. So he's kind of saying, yes, I'm a debunker of ghosts. That's what I do. Find out what really causes the phenomena. But we're sort of promised one failure, which could be like a real ghost. So we will see. So this first story, he's doing his thing. A friend wants him to help out with this mystery of some sort of haunted inn where somebody who stays in it has died mysteriously. Young healthy guy has died of kind of a syncope. Syncope. Sorry.
Have you watched none of the medical dramas that I force on you?
Well, not really. And
what am I going to do with you?
It's ingenious. I mean, it's yes, it does prove non-supernatural. The sort of way it all happens is a really cool bit of sort of mechanics, and pretty enjoyable short story. So, like I said, it was in a magazine. I will tell you a bit about the magazine and the sort of setting where the story was, and then I'll review the other stories as I get to them. Okay, so the John Bell series was in Cassell's magazine. Individual issues looked a bit like this. It's late 19th century, illustrated monthly, costing 6p. And for your 6p you would get a nice coloured cover, bunch of adverts, and fiction and articles, and surviving copies tend to be bound sets like this one. Luckily, all of the John Bell stories appear in one sort of one volume, so let's get a bit of an idea of where these stories fitted in. So as it put itself out as a family magazine, so you wouldn't expect it to be full of soul-searing horror. This contents page that's been added into the bound set, so it kind of takes your various magazines and turns them into a book. It's 3 women lying around reading, so suggesting maybe it's all about the sort of female readership they could be aiming for in these floaty dresses. So here's one serial, By a Hair's Breadth by Head and Hill. Some sort of thriller, I gather, with some sort of Russian nihilists as the threat. As you can see, since the Strand magazine, the one that had Sherlock Holmes in it, started having a picture on maybe every page, but certainly on every opening, others followed suit, and this was one. So heavily illustrated. 60 years ago and now, it's a factual article, and they've used their power of illustration to do lots of infographics comparing 1897 with 1837. So 1837, the British Empire, 156 million people. 1897, 320 million. Then there's other things to do with how much savings people have got. The penny post, what a great thing that is. Could there be penny posts that could go all around the world? Wouldn't that be awesome? How many new newspapers there are. So in 1897 there are now 2,500 newspapers, when those only used to be 400. And there's some more science stuff about the wonders of the telegraph. Brilliant illustration with all these sort of telegraph wires joining people together. So it's really optimistic sense of progress. Crimes being reduced, education's increasing. So that's part of the setting, you know, science, progress. Robert W. Chambers, he of The King in Yellow fame, has a story here called The God of Battles. Some Club Ghosts, not actually a ghost story, it's about famous men from London clubland. Must get one of these stands to read on. Through the Flames, that's a piece about the fire brigade. So pictures, they have had ways to reproduce photographs by this time, as well as these sort of line illustrations and prints. Regular feature, our birthday pages, celebrities of the time, such as the Duchess of Cleveland, Lord Wolsey, Kitchener, having their birthdays. Demon of Revenge, E.W. Hornung. E.W. Hornung, who probably best known for creating the character Raffles, a story of Sydney and the bush. So an Australian adventure. A day in a Central African village. So yep, we have got the British Empire. I once shot an old bull elephant. I'd keep quiet about that these days if I was you. Handel in England. Mr. Music Man, including some music. Where's the story? Oh, here we go. Right. Master of Mysteries. So this brilliant regular masthead for these stories with John Bell with this torch or lantern shining into the face of this robed figure who's like, ah no, you found me out. And then there's the story I've talked about. We're pretty near the end of the mag now. Lion Tamer. It's a story about a lion tamer. with pictures. And I think, sport of the month, driving. Oh dear. And a little story for the kiddies, The Oyster Maiden, which I think is pretty much The Little Mermaid. And finally, The Gatherer, an illustrated record of invention, discovery and science. Photos of a couple of their authors. Quite like that cap actually. And so yeah, various new things like a bicycle lock, a centrifugal railway, acetylene in the house, a luncheon outfit for cyclists. So yeah, more of the sort of prizes and stuff, and then we're on to the next issue, and there'll be another one of these stories coming soon. The Warder of the Door. Okay, so second day, and I'm checking out that very story, The Warder of the Door. So it came sandwiched between a factual piece about London in the Queen's reign, which says about all the changes that had happened between 1837 and 1897. So another kind of let's celebrate the fantastic Victorian era. Another infographic too, a map showing how big London was, how big it was then. And that was a good thing. Then you get the story. So yeah, these John Bell stories, thinking about it, 1897 meant they were the first magazine serial occult detective there had been. So others, you had sort of the same character showing up in some disparate stories, but this was the first time you got one of these regular things. So I've always sort of not bothered with them too much, because thinking, well, they haven't got the real supernatural, you know, I want real ghosts. But they've got all the sort of gothic atmosphere and interest of those kind of stories, so I'm really enjoying them so far. So this one, so our hero, man of leisure, helping out a pal again. He's visiting his house. He's got an old parent, and there's some stuff about don't look at the old book of the family history, because there's stuff about a family curse. The last 6 months of my life have been a living death. The horror began the following way. You know what a deep interest I've always taken in the family history of our house. Terrible curse which the old abbot in the 14th century had bestowed upon the family. So there's stuff about a weirdly shaped coffin and a vault and a door. The door of the family crypt behaves oddly. So the old fella dies, and his mate summons John Bell back because of weird occurrences, and they end up trapped in the vault, and the other chap goes mad because of the incarceration. Great illustrations, but again it's a scientific explanation, although he does go into a weird kind of fugue state. So John Bell, it's like he has a sort of bit of a kind of more than normal sensitivity. Again, not unusual in the later occult detectives. So still enjoying it. That story is immediately followed by a bit of human interest. The Sensations of a Drowning Man, by a man who drowned twice. Okay, jumping on to talk about the third story. Had our winter jabs today, so I'm expecting to subside into a sort of rather subdued state tomorrow based on past performance. So yeah, let's get on to the third story. So this one comes first in the magazine. That's the August issue. Being first, it gets a big picture, which is lovely. A little event from the story where basically it's set in the railways. So we've left behind spooky inns and 14th century curses and that kind of thing. We're in the modern up-to-date world of railways and tunnels. Story's a little bit like The Signalman by Charles Dickens, which is a quite famous story. That was 30 years old by this time, so we're 1897. Basically, a signalman has died unaccountably near the mouth of a tunnel, near his signal box, and John Bell's called in, looking quite Holmesian there in his travelling gear, and sets to figuring it out. And there's another fatality. There's a young man who'll be accused of murder if he can't figure out why this is really happening. And of course, the tunnel is thought to be haunted, so it's like there's devilry afoot. Signalmen are refusing to go to work. Apparently there'd been a rash of lonely signalmen going mad, and I'd searched in the press archives for that, and there were indeed some mad signalman stories. Yes, and the answer turns out to be not human malfeasance this time, but something actually from nature. Story number 4, the 8 Mile Lock. So we come across this following on from an article called Tragedies of the Sea, and we're still on the water because it's what happens is John Bell, man of leisure and ghost exposer, gets invited to a houseboat in Goring in Sussex, where he's promised a gay old time. So it's on with the stripy blazer. The stripy blazer and the straw boater for a house party with some bright young things of the 1890s. And this lady's brought with her to wear some fabulously valuable diamonds. So what might happen? Yes, they're stolen. No one knows how. So that's one mystery. Then, as he's punting around on his own, gets to some locks on the river. So I think it's a river, not a canal, but it has a lock keeper who's had a disturbing couple of nights with strange voices emerging from the lock, but no visible crafts or people or anything. So he's sort of saying, help me out with this ghostly business, which John Bell does. And there's a scary moment. Hark! There was something moving about down in the well of darkness below me. So that's the lock, empty of water. And as I stood and watched, I saw that the water was uncovering a long black mass, and that something ran slowly out of the water and began to clamber up the slimy, slippery beams. What in the name of heaven could it be? By the uncertain light I could only see its dim outline. It seemed to have an enormous bulbous head and dripping, glistening body. The sound of a rapid patter up the towpath told me that the old man had seen it and was running for his life. A battle ensues, and, spoilers from now on, it's a guy with a diving helmet. And he's actually got a sort of one-man submarine where the helmet is the front of the submarine, which is quite an intriguing vision. And he's the one who stole the diamonds. So that's how that one comes together. So that's a really good story. I mean, I'd say these are better written than lots of stuff I've read. Then you get a little poem called The Ballad of Connell, which features a Jennie, spelt like proper Jennie. Then you get Night on the Iron Road, a sort of documentary article about the railways. So again, with the technology and the progress and some fantastic atmospheric photos, including one of a bookstall, a station bookstall, with big row of adverts for various magazines, including this one, and Ziska, which I believe was a novel. So that's fun. So yeah, story number 4, good stuff. So stories 5 and 6. The 5th story is called How Siva Spoke. Siva, Shiva, Hindu deity. And I went down a right old Victorianist rabbit hole from the first sentence. During the summer of the past year, a medical friend of mine sent me an invitation to dine with him and 2 of his fellow craftsmen at the Welcome Club in the Earl's Court exhibition. So, obviously, they've got to eat somewhere, but I knew those Earl's Court exhibitions were quite interesting. We studied them a bit on the Entertaining the Victorians module on the MA I did, and they were these huge spectacles. I mean, the Earl's Court Exhibition Centre, it's actually still there, but at the time it was like a sort of a park filled with a sort of temporary city of exhibits and things like that. I wonder what the Welcome Club was. It sounds like it's the catering concession they put near the front for people who can't wait to get a bite to eat, but it actually sounds quite a big deal. For a start, it was run like a club. You had to apply and be seconded and accepted by a committee of worthies, and it was also quite costly as well. But do you read you a description from the programme? The Old Welcome Club, in connection with this exhibition, under the present presidency of Field Marshal Lord Roberts of Kandahar, GCB, GCI, GCIE VC, and a committee of distinguished gentlemen, will be open during the season. The club was founded in 1887 and has been a continuous and popular feature on its present site since that time. It was formed for the purpose of welcoming distinguished American guests to the American exhibition, and it will this year be the scene of welcome to many native princes and other distinguished guests from India's coral strand. The club has this year been thoroughly redecorated and refurnished and will provide a still more welcome place of retreat for its hundreds of members and their friends. And apparently there was music, and you could dine outside, and there was a fabulous dinner. The caterers were one of the first mass catering companies ever to exist. So that was interesting. And then I was looking up, so okay, the previous year, this was published 1897, so let's say they mean 1896 or maybe 1895. Both of those exhibitions related to India. In 1895 there was Indian Empire exhibition, and then followed up in 1896 with a sort of sequel. I think it was India and Ceylon. So basically you had like a sort of Indian city and all sorts of exhibits and performers, loads of artwork, photographs, artifacts. There was a sort of centrepiece that was a huge theatrical spectacle. A grand spectacle in 2 acts, India, where you would see pageants and a dream of the Hindu paradise, and it climaxes with Queen Victoria being made the Empress Queen of India. Other stuff, and it wasn't all like India all the way. Panorama of ancient Rome, new Rontgen X-rays, the theatrograph, Sinhalese artists, Indian performers, Indian jungle, Burmese football team. So a bit like the stuff in this magazine, a mixture of the kind of exotic view of the empire and latest progress scientific stuff, all presented for entertainment. So it just occurred to me that the authors could have been to that exhibition. In fact, they were likely to have been, because hundreds of thousands of people went. You know, it was like a massive attraction with huge capacity, and from that, because it had plenty of Shiva temples, photographs, statues, etc., could well have been inspired to do the story, which isn't great, to be honest. So it's about a chap who has been in India, an English guy, and he's come back obsessed with a sort of mashup of Hinduism and spiritualism. So they seem to be viewed as being the same thing. You know, he worships the Indian deities and also does seances and things like that. And there he is. I mean, looking pretty amazing. And he has this statue of Siva, as it's called here, in one of his rooms in his big estate, and he believes it started talking to him and telling him to do things, including latest development is murder his niece, which will mean that her cousin Jasper Bagswell will inherit a fortune when he dies. So it's kind of obvious, you know, the kind of trickery that's happening and who's responsible. You know, Jasper Bagswell, what a great villain name. So yeah, not fantastic, but I suspect that either John Bell or L.T. Meade or Robert Eustace, or all three of them, had a rather good dinner at the Welcome Club and then fell asleep and dreamed the whole thing. Luckily, the next one, story number 6, To Prove an Alibi, is really good. It's not very supernatural, but it's got lots of fun kind of race against time. Can John Bell get somewhere through various forms of transport, with villains thwarting him all along the way to stop disaster happening? And then there's the usual, like, completely absurd but rather amusing mechanical contrivance that leads people to believe that somebody is here when in fact they're there, and kind of classic ghosty stuff, figures emerging from tapestries and things happening in four-poster beds. So To Prove an Alibi, story 6 was good. I thought that was it, but there is in fact a 7th story. So I've now got to wait for another one of these books to finish all this off. And if you remember back to the beginning, we're still waiting for that time that John Bell does not expose the ghost, does not succeed in prevailing, and therefore could be that the supernatural is real after all. Okay, I'm back after a gap of a couple of months for reasons. I thought there were 6 stories, and I thought therefore that I had them all in this one volume, but found there was a 7th final story. So I naturally assumed that will be in the next edition of the magazine. So this goes to November 1897. So I thought it's probably in December 1897, and then if I have the next volume, I'll have that story and any follow-up stuff. But
poor naive boy.
Well, I found it, but the eBay seller was on holiday.
Oh!
So it took a while to come, but it came yesterday, and I fell upon it, keen to find this final John Bell story.
Slavering he was.
So I was going through the contents page, through the articles in the world of society. Story about the greatest love, a story called An Amazing Christmas Eve, which I actually read.
It was amazing.
It was amazing and quite funny, but it's horrendously misogynist.
Is it? Oh,
yeah. I was thinking, I'll read this out, and then I won't, because people would think, well, I know it's Christmas Day, but we're going to go to Roy's house with pitchforks anyway. Women's clubs in London. So all sorts of interesting stuff. You could save up coupons to get a manuscript of A Christmas Carol, but no sign of L.T. Meade or John Bell, Master of Mysteries. So what's going on? Well, it turns out this final story appeared in December 1898, so they waited a year.
Good heavens.
And I can't find that as magazines, but I have found it in other forms, and also the sort of, there's an interesting sequel or possibly prequel or both to the story. So the story itself is called The Secret of Emu Plain. So after all the things that have happened, John Bell goes to Australia, where there's been a terrible, what looks like a monstrous attack on somebody who's died out in the wilderness, and
Like that.
that's worse than that even. So that's been happening, and it looks like it's a monster, and the sort of the local view is there's a creature called something like the bunyip.
There is a creature called something like the bunyip
The bunyip.
in Aboriginal mythology.
Yeah, so it's bunyip attack, is it? And there's also a physical feature of the terrain. Almost in the middle of the plain, stood in solitary grandeur, the great Emu Rock, a grotesque, bare, perpendicular crag of limestone, rising a sheer 300 feet from the ground. So there's this kind of apparently unclimbable thing sticking up 300 feet, and the dismembered bodies end up on the top of this crag. How did that happen? How did they get up
It's a
there?
locked crag mystery.
And eventually John Bell himself, rendered unconscious, finds himself on top of the crag. How did he get there? He doesn't know. He has to fight snakes and escape. So he does survive, but he's still like, well, maybe there is the supernatural after all, because I don't know what the solution was. So then Cassell's magazine used this as a bit of reader engagement. So after that story appeared, they said, a mystery competition open to all readers of the above story. This exceedingly clever story is the sequel to the adventures of John Bell, the Ghost Exposer, related to us last year under the title A Master of Mysteries. Also, they'd brought out a book with just those 6 stories in. Some of our readers will remember Mrs. Meade spoke of the one mystery which John Bell had not been able to fathom. So that's that one. We suggest that our readers attempt to solve the mystery themselves. We will award 10 prizes of 1 guinea each to the 10 solutions which, in Mrs. Meade's opinion, are the best sent to us. And then stuff about how you send them in. Okay, so fast forward to April. There's an author's solution. So this is like the official reason. So actually, there is one of their bizarre technological explanations for how people were getting to the top of the crag, having been murdered, for their inheritances and things like that. I won't tell you what it is because you might read the story one day, but suffice to say, it's a very complicated, pretty unlikely way of getting people from the ground to the top of the rock. That's how it happened.
Is there a hot air balloon in it at any point?
Well, wait and see.
Okay.
So they had 386 competitors sending things in from all around the world. United States, West Indies, Canada, India, Australia.
Blimey.
Even more diversified than the origin of the stories. Sorry, the origin of the solutions was their nature. Nearly half the competitors found the way to the top of the rock by means of a fissure or tunnel in the limestone, whose existence was known only to the Corrie and the baddies. Okay.
I think that might be called a chimney.
Yeah, well, that would...
In some...
Yeah.
From the extensive amount of rock climbing that I did in my youth.
A very large number staked its chance of a prize on the suggestion that a whirlwind was the sole force by which the bodies were raised from the plain to the top of the crag. Not a few hazarded the suggestion that the rocket gun, which played so important a part in the rescue of Mr. Bell, had a counterpart which was equally active in getting him into the hole. The united efforts of crows and eagle hawks, the snake, balloons both captive and free, and even indigestion on the part of Mr. Bell were all in turn offered as the explanations of the mystery. So 4 people had guessed the Mrs. Meade answer, but the others, the most plausible ones, made up the 10 prize winners. So had an interesting sort of afterlife as a story, but there's more to come that is somewhat horrific and possibly a sort of ghost story. Mm-hmm. So I was reading the list of the winners, so there's names and addresses. So just looking up some of the names to see if anything, they had some sort of presence in the archives of the world, and some do. You can find out when people lived and died and stuff like that. The Reverend J. Mirehouse from Colsterworth in Grantham struck me. So I searched for this Reverend Mirehouse.
Is that Lincolnshire?
Yeah, over in the east. And the first thing to come up was actually from a parliamentary debate. So I thought, okay, well, he's a vicar. It's a parliamentary debate about the Burial Act. So I assumed maybe he was some sort of expert witness, some sort of expert involved in the debate about burials and so on. Not so. It was actually, here's what happened. The Reverend J. Mirehouse had a problem in that his burial ground was full, and he had an idea for creating another one in some nearby land, complicated by the fact that he wanted to put nonconformists in one and Anglicans in the other, and because the apparently approval of new cemeteries comes from central government, he was in dispute with the government. So what he did was sent the dead body of an infant in the post to the Home Secretary.
Oh my gosh! No!
Without a return address on the box. But he was found out anyway. So the Home Office baby, the ghastly gift to the Home Secretary, was obviously a huge thing in the news, and there was an inquest into the baby, which there would have to be, led by Dr. Braxton Hicks, of the contractions, son of the
Braxton
Hicks contractions man who gets mentioned in every medical show on television.
Well, every medical show where there's a pregnant woman.
Yeah, you have to have your Braxton
Hicks, for people who don't know, are what they call practice contractions.
And you'd think posting a dead baby there's no coming back from that. You think there'd be a criminal charge, and would you stay in your job as a vicar?
G-frot, mate.
Nope, none of that happened.
Really?
An expert in canon law said we can't think of anything to apply in this situation. And he was still the vicar of, Colsterworth into the 20th century. He did apologise.
Oh, good.
So obviously that is horrific, kind of jaw-droppingly unbelievable, but also what I would see that as a kind of ghost story is that you need to scream.
I'm having Braxton Hicks. Oh God, shouldn't have leant over like that. Carry on.
But also, why I class it as a kind of ghost story is that a stillborn baby out in the wilds of Lincolnshire would have been buried. There might not even have been records at all of that event. Because of this strange action, the body was eventually buried in Westminster. That was the decision of the inquest, is the authorities should bury it there. And it still has this identity in the archives. You know, it's still in dozens of newspaper stories, mentioned in Hansard. So it has this ethereal, if not ghostly, continued existence because of the strange events. Anyway, and 14 years later, he won a guinea for guessing how you could get he ought to be the one to know.
Absolutely.
How you could get a body from the ground to the top of a hill in Australia.
Can I just say about stillbirth? Would they still have been buried in the Potter's Field at that point in church history?
I don't know about that.
Because they're not baptised.
He told the family, I'll take it away and deal with it, and then did this instead.
Don't think he was very good, really, was he?
A bit presumptuous.
It is. I don't like him. No, I'm glad he's not.
Mirehouse as well. He sounds like a Dickensian villain. Okay, so that little digression brings us to an end of reading the John Bell stories for Occult Detective October. Some previous month that I can't even remember when it's. I've got different glasses. It's that long. The glasses you voted for. Okay. Thanks, everybody.
Thank
Bye.
you. Bye.
We'll see you back soon with something else.